Earth is the bottom of a hole. Not a hole in the ground, but a hole in space, the deep well that the planet's own gravity digs around it, and climbing out of that well costs more than climbing out of almost anywhere else we will ever live. To leave the ground here, you have to reach a speed of 11 kilometers every second. From the surface of Mars, it is barely 5. For now, that gap is only an engineering problem, a matter of fuel and money, but run it forward far enough and it stops being about engineering at all. A species that lives on more than one world will slowly, and without ever deciding to, do more of its living where the well is shallow, simply because everything is easier there. And where life goes, birth follows. So somewhere out ahead of us there is a child who will be the last human ever born on this planet. Not the last human anywhere, just the last one that Earth itself ever brings into being. No one will know it is happening while it happens, and the children born after, out there, in a third of our gravity, may be the first humans who can never come home. Tonight, we are going to follow that threshold all the way past the moment it is crossed. By the end of this, you will understand why the deepest gravity well we live near quietly pushes our own future off the planet, why a body that grows up in a third of Earth's gravity may never be able to stand under the full weight of ours, and why the last human born on Earth marks the moment our species stops being something this world makes and becomes something it can only remember. None of this needs anything we do not already know about gravity and bone and time. It only needs us to follow them honestly to where they lead. If the kind of question that keeps you up is the kind you would rather sit inside than close, a quiet subscribe helps these videos reach the people who feel the same. Start with a number, because everything else grows out of it. To leave the ground on Earth, to actually escape and not fall back, you have to be moving at about 11 kilometers every second. That is the speed the planet's gravity demands of anything that wants to leave for good. And it is enormous, far faster than a rifle bullet, fast enough to cross a country in the time it takes to say the sentence. From the surface of Mars, the same escape takes about 5 kilometers a second. From the Moon, barely 2.5. Those are not small differences. The energy it takes to make that climb rises with the square of the speed. So Earth's well is not a little deeper than the others. It is in a different class entirely, the steepest hole any of us will live beside for a very long time. I want to be clear that this is not a fact about rockets. It is a fact about the planet. Gravity reaches out from all that mass beneath you and bends the space around it into a kind of pit, and Earth, being the largest solid body we live on, digs the deepest pit. Everything that wants to leave has to pay the full price of climbing out, every single time. And the price is set by physics, not by us. We have gotten very good at paying it, but getting good at paying a cost is not the same as the cost going away, and the cost of leaving Earth has not gone down by much in half a century, because the depth of the well has not changed at all. For now, that depth is an engineering problem, and we treat it like one. It is a question of fuel, of money, of how much you can lift on a given day. But step back from the single launch and look at it as something a whole civilization does over centuries, and the well stops being an engineering problem and becomes a force that shapes where people are. Because if it is this expensive to climb out of Earth, then it is also this expensive to bring anything down into Earth, and this expensive to keep doing your living at the bottom of the deepest hole around when shallower holes are available next door. Here is the part that I think gets missed. The first people to go to Mars will go as visitors, hauled up out of this well at great cost and set down in a shallower one. But the moment a second world can make its own food, its own air, its own shelter, its own machines, the logic quietly flips. It stops making sense to climb all the way down into Earth's well to do the ordinary business of living, when the same business is cheaper to do where the gravity is gentler. Industry drifts toward the shallow wells, then the people who run the industry drift after it, and eventually the thing that always follows people, in every place humans have ever settled, follows them out there too. children. Birth goes where life already is. That is the whole engine of this, and it runs on nothing more exotic than cost. Not ambition, not destiny, not a grand decision made by anyone. Just the slow accounting of a species that finds it easier, year over year, to be where the climb is short. The center of human life does not stay on Earth because Earth is special to us. It stays only as long as Earth is the cheapest place to be, and the gravity well guarantees that, sooner or later, it will not be. I should be honest that the timeline here is completely open. I cannot tell you whether this takes 2 centuries or 20, whether it happens because Mars becomes attractive or because Earth becomes hard to live on, whether it is a smooth drift or a sharp break forced by something going wrong down here. The schedule is genuinely unknown, and anyone who gives you a confident date is guessing. What is not unknown is the direction. The physics of the well does not care about our reasons. It only sets the slope, and the slope runs outward, away from the deepest hole, toward the shallow ones. The reason the well is so punishing is hidden inside the way a rocket has to work, and it is worth seeing plainly. To reach that escape speed, a rocket carries fuel, but the fuel has weight, and lifting the fuel takes more fuel, and lifting that takes more again. The cost does not add up, it multiplies. The result is that a machine standing on the pad ready to leave Earth is almost entirely fueled by weight, a thin shell of payload riding on an enormous tank, and only a tiny fraction of what lifts off ever reaches space. That is the tax the depth of the well charges, and it is brutal precisely because Earth is so massive. The same machine leaving Mars, where the escape speed is less than half of ours, needs a small fraction of the fuel, because the multiplying runs so much gentler in a shallower hole. Put it in the plainest terms. To lift a single kilogram off the surface of Earth and out of its grip costs a certain large amount of energy fixed by the planet, unchangeable by us. To lift that same kilogram off Mars costs a small fraction of it. To lift it off the Moon, less again. Every kilogram of food, every kilogram of metal, every kilogram of a human body pays that tax on the way out, and Earth charges the highest rate of any solid place we will live near. We have learnt to pay it over and over, but the rate has not dropped, because you cannot negotiate with the mass of a planet. And a tax that high, charged on everything, does not stay an abstraction. It quietly decides what is worth doing where. As long as Earth is the only place that can make the things people need, we pay the tax to bring them up, and we pay it gladly because there is no choice. But the day a second world can grow its own food and forge its own metal and build its own shelter, the calculation turns over. From that day, doing anything at the bottom of Earth's well means paying the highest lifting cost in the neighborhood for no reason, when the same work is cheaper in a shallower one. The well stops being the gateway and starts being the thing you route around. Think about what changes the first time a second world can fully support itself, because that is the moment the whole pattern locks in. As long as Earth is the only place that can make what people need, the deep well is just a price we pay to send things up, and we pay it because there is no other source. But the day a settlement on a shallower world can grow its own food, refine its own metal, build its own machines and shelter and air, the deep well flips from a gateway into a barrier. Suddenly the most expensive thing anyone can do is climb down into Earth to make things there and haul them back out. The cheap move, the obvious move, the move a civilization makes without anyone deciding it, is to do the building where the lifting is light. And the lighter places are right there. Mars sits at 1/5 of the lifting cost. The Moon, shallower still, at an escape speed of barely 2.5 kilometers a second, costs less again. A growing civilization that needs to move mass around, between worlds, between orbits, between the places it mines and the places it builds, will route that mass through the shallow wells and around the deep one, because every kilogram saved on the climb is a kilogram earned. Earth, for all that it is the richest and most alive world we will ever know, becomes the one place it is least efficient to operate, the bottom of the most expensive hole in the neighborhood. People follow the work the way they always have. Through all of human history, populations have pooled wherever living was cheap and possible, along the rivers, in the valleys, where the land gave the most for the least. The same logic, scaled up to worlds, does the same thing. The settlements grow where the work is where the lifting is light, and the lifting is light everywhere but Earth. So the center of gravity of the species, the place where most of the living and most of the building and eventually most of the being born happens, drifts off the planet, not in a rush, not by decree, but by the steady accounting of cost, world by world and generation by generation. That is the quiet engine under everything that follows, not a fleet of colony ships and a grand decision to abandon the cradle, just the slow arithmetic of a deep well and a few shallow ones, doing to a multi-world species exactly what the cost of living has always done to people, which is to move them, over time, to where it is cheaper to be. The well does not push us out in any dramatic sense. It simply makes staying the expensive choice, and over enough time, expensive choices lose. There is an irony folded into the depth of Earth's well that is worth naming, because it returns later with a different face. The same gravity that makes this planet so hard to leave is the gravity that made it worth living on in the first place. A world has to pull hard enough to hold an atmosphere, to keep the air and the water from drifting off into space, and Earth pulls hard enough to keep a deep, rich blanket of both. That deep pull is why the sky is thick and the oceans are full and the radiation is turned aside. The shallow wells that are so easy to leave are easy to leave precisely because they are too weak to hold much of anything, which is exactly why Mars is a sliver of cold air and a bare, irradiated ground. The well that traps us is the well that shelters us. They are the same well. So the choice the future faces is not between a hard world and an easy one. It is between a deep well that is livable and shallow wells that are reachable, and you cannot have both in one place, because the thing that makes a world livable is the very thing that makes it hard to leave. Earth is the most habitable world we will ever stand on, and it is the most expensive to get off of for the same single reason. Mars is a fraction of the cost to leave, and a place that wants to kill you for the same single reason. The depth of the well and the worth of the world rise and fall together. That is the bargain underneath all of this, and it is not one anyone designed. The deep well gives us a world we can actually live on without machines, open to the sky and charges, in return the highest price in the neighborhood for ever leaving it or returning to it. The shallow wells charge almost nothing to come and go, and give in return nothing a body can live in without a wall around it. A species that spreads across both is going to find its living drawn toward the cheap, unlivable places, and its one livable place turned into the expensive one, and that tension between where it is easy to be and where it is possible to be unprotected runs through every step of what comes next. And notice that this first step asks nothing dramatic of anyone. No one has to choose to leave Earth behind. No one has to decide the planet is finished. The drift off the world happens through 1,000 small, sensible decisions, each one just choosing the cheaper place to build a thing or grow a crop or raise a family, each one rational on its own, the sum of them carrying the center of the species off the planet over generations. The deep well does not order anyone away. It simply makes staying the expensive option quietly in every ledger until the cheap option wins by default. That is the first domino, and it is not a push, it is a slope, and everything else rolls down it. And once you accept the direction, even without the date, you arrive at something specific and strange. If the weight of human life slides off this planet, then at some point the weight of human birth slides off it too. There will be a first human born somewhere that is not Earth, and the most likely somewhere The nearest shallow well with a solid surface to stand on is Mars. So before we follow the threshold of the last Earth birth, we have to go and stand in the place that replaces it. What is it actually like, in plain physical terms, to be born at the bottom of that other, shallower well on the surface of Mars? The first thing Mars does to an unprotected body is kill it, and it has several ways to do that at once. Stand on the surface without a suit and the cold alone is lethal. The average temperature across the planet is around 60 degrees below zero, and on a clear night near the poles it falls far lower than that. But the cold is not even the fastest of it. The air on Mars is so thin that it is barely air at all, less than 1% of the pressure you are sitting in right now, and at that pressure the water in your body would begin to boil at your own body temperature. Not because it is hot, because there is almost nothing pressing down to keep it liquid. A body exposed on the Martian surface would be freezing and boiling in the same minute. And that is before the radiation, which is the part that does not stop. Earth keeps a global magnetic field and a thick blanket of air above it, and between them they turn aside most of the high-energy particles that pour through space. Mars has neither. Its magnetic field died long ago, and its atmosphere is a sliver, so the radiation that Earth deflects falls more or less straight onto the Martian ground. Galactic cosmic rays from far outside the solar system, and bursts of particles thrown off by the sun, sleet down onto the surface at a rate of roughly 2/3 of a millisievert every day. Over a year, that adds up to something close to 230 millisieverts, many dozens of times the natural background a body soaks up in a year on Earth. It is not a quick death like the cold or the pressure. It is a slow one, a steady accumulation of damage to every cell it passes through, and on the open surface there is no turning it off. Even the ground itself is hostile. The fine rust-coloured dust that covers Mars, the regolith, is laced with perchlorates, a kind of salt that is toxic to the human thyroid and dangerous to drink or breathe. It gets into everything. It is sharp and clinging and chemically reactive, nothing like the worn soil of Earth, and it would have to be kept out of the air a person breathes and the water a person drinks with constant effort. The surface of Mars is not a harsh version of a desert. It is a place actively composed of things that take a body apart, by temperature, by pressure, by radiation, and by poison, all at the same time. So the common picture of Mars as a frontier, a hard but basically Earth-like second home you could one day walk out onto in shirt sleeves, is wrong in a way worth saying plainly. There is no walking out onto Mars. Every breath drawn there, for the foreseeable future, and very likely forever, is breath inside manufactured air, behind walls, under shielding. The first human born on Mars is not born onto the planet. That child is born inside a sealed volume of pressure and warmth and breathable gas that people built and people maintain, on a world that, the instant the walls fail, offers a developing body nothing but several ways to die. I find it clarifying to hold that image without any drama laid over it. A child takes its first breath in a pocket of borrowed air, and a few centimeters away, on the other side of the shell, is a surface near 60 below, under a sky the dim color of dust, soaked in radiation with a pressure so low that the child's own blood would boil if it ever reached the open. That is the birthplace. Not a new Earth, a thin bubble of Earth-like conditions, carried out into a place that wants nothing of the kind, kept going by machines, surrounded on every side by a planet that is, in the most literal physical sense, trying to kill whatever lives there. And yet the thing that makes the rest of this possible is that almost all of it can be engineered around. The cold can be held off with heat. The pressure can be held in with walls. The radiation can be blunted by burying the living space under enough rock and soil, or under water, which is a good shield. The perchlorates can be washed out and kept out. None of it is easy, but none of it is impossible, and a determined settlement could keep a body alive and even comfortable through all of it. The air and the cold and the radiation and the poison are all, in the end, problems with solutions. Take the killers one at a time, because each is worse than the word harsh suggests. The cold on Mars is not winter, at 60 below on average. With the thin air holding almost no heat, the ground at the poles grows cold enough that the atmosphere itself freezes out, carbon dioxide settling as frost across the winter landscape. There is no warmth banked in that air to soften a night, because there is almost no air. Heat bleeds off a body or a surface straight into a sky that does nothing to hold it. The thinness of the air is its own separate way to die, and the number behind it is exact. There is a pressure, low enough, at which water boils at the temperature of a living body, and it has a name, the Armstrong limit. Earth at sea level sits far above it. Mars, at less than 1% of that pressure, sits far below. So on the open surface, the moisture lining a person's lungs and eyes and mouth would begin to boil away at body temperature, not from heat, but from the sheer absence of anything pressing in. A body there does not slowly run short of air. It comes apart, the water in it turning to vapour, in the same minutes the cold is taking hold. And over all of it falls the radiation, which never pauses and never softens. Most of it is galactic cosmic rays, the nuclei of atoms flung across the galaxy at nearly the speed of light, so energetic that ordinary shielding barely slows them, and they crash through a body-breaking molecules as they go. On top of that base, the sun throws sudden storms of particles, solar events that can spike the dose sharply for hours or days with little warning. On Earth, the magnetic field and the deep air turn nearly all of this aside before it reaches the ground. On Mars there is no field and almost no air, so it arrives, day after day, at a rate that over a year adds up to many dozens of times the natural dose a body absorbs down here. It is the one killer that does its work invisibly, with no sensation at all, simply accumulating in the cells. The picture most of us carry of Mars, the one from a century of stories, is a frontier you could one day tame, a rusty open country where settlers in light gear walk under a pink sky toward a town they are building. It is worth saying clearly that this picture is not a softened version of the truth. It is the opposite of the truth. There is no walking under that sky. There is no air to breathe, no warmth to feel, no pressure to keep a body intact, and a steady rain of radiation through it all. The frontier image quietly imagines Mars as a hard Earth. It is not a hard Earth. It is a place where the entire surface, every square meter of it, is lethal to an unprotected body within minutes, for several independent reasons at once. Which means settlement on Mars does not look like a town under the open sky. It looks like life sealed inside, permanently, with the planet kept firmly on the other side of the wall. The most realistic form of it is not even on the surface but partly under it, habitats buried beneath enough rock and soil to block the radiation, or tucked into the natural lava tubes that thread the Martian underground, where meters of stone stand between a body and the sky. Water, locked as ice in the ground and at the poles, would be dug and melted and guarded. Air would be manufactured and recycled and never ever taken for granted. The settlement is a sealed and buried system keeping a small volume of Earth-like conditions alive inside a world that erases them the instant the seal fails. And a child born into that does not grow up outdoors because there is no outdoors a body can enter. That child never feels wind on bare skin because wind on bare skin would mean a pressure that boils the blood. Never feels rain, never feels sun directly on the face without a barrier, never breathes air that was not built by a machine. The whole of the open world, the sky and the surface and the weather, is a thing seen through a visor or a port, a landscape you look at and never touch, beautiful in the dim way of dust and rust, and as off-limits as the surface of the sun. The first humans of Mars are not frontier folk under a wide sky. They are people who live their entire lives inside, on a planet that will not have them any other way. Stand on the surface in the middle of a Martian day, And the strangeness is not violence but stillness, a hostility that is utterly quiet. The sky overhead is not blue but a dim tan, the colour of the dust suspended in the thin air, brightening toward the sun, which hangs smaller and weaker than it does here, giving less than half the light. Near sunset, the colours reverse from ours, the sky flushing a cold blue around the shrinking sun, while the rest of it stays dusty and dark. The ground is rust and rock to every horizon, dunes and stone and the long shadows of a weak light, and over all of it lies a silence almost complete, because air this thin barely carries sound. A storm could be rising and you would hardly hear it. And the storms do rise, and they do not pass quickly. Mars throws dust storms that can spread until they wrap the entire planet, dimming the weak sun further, lasting not hours or days but weeks and sometimes months, a planet-wide haze of fine grit hanging in the air. The dust gets into everything, fine and clinging, and laced with the perchlorate salts, and it does not wash away in rain, because there is no rain. It settles and stays and has to be fought, mechanically, endlessly, by anyone trying to keep machines running, and seals clean, and air breathable. This is the surface a child born on Mars would grow up beside but never truly enter. They would see it through ports and visors, the tan sky and the rust ground and the small cold sun, a landscape close enough to touch through a wall and lethal the moment the wall is gone. They might find it beautiful, in the way people find any home country beautiful, the only world they have ever stood on, but they would know it the way you know a thing behind glass, never on bare skin, never in open lungs, a planet that is theirs to look at and never theirs to walk out into. The first hostility of Mars is the loud one, the cold and the pressure and the radiation. The deeper one is this quieter fact, that the whole open world is a view and never a place. But there is one feature of Mars that no wall holds off, and no shielding blunts, and no engineering changes, because it is not a thing the planet adds to the body. It is a thing the planet does to the body, everywhere inside the walls as much as outside them. It is the pull. Mars has about a third of Earth's gravity, and that third reaches into the sealed spaces and the buried habitats exactly as it reaches across the open surface, because gravity does not stop at a wall. So set aside everything that can be built. The air and the walls can be made. The gravity cannot be changed. What does a third of Earth's gravity do to a body that does not merely visit it, but grows up inside it from the very beginning? Gravity is not a backdrop the body performs in front of. It is a load the body is built around, a constant downward pull that bone and muscle and heart all develop in answer to. Take most of it away, and the body answers differently. And we know this because we have watched it happen, not on Mars, but in the near weightlessness of orbit, just above the Earth. The bodies that spend months up there come back changed in ways that are precise and measurable, and in part permanent. Start with bone. In the near absence of gravity, the weight-bearing bones, the spine and the hips and the long bones of the leg, lose roughly 1 to 1.5% of their density every month. Over a 6-month stay, that is around 10% of the bone gone, a loss that on the ground would take an aging body the better part of a decade. The reason is simple and physical. Bone is not a fixed scaffold. It is constantly torn down and rebuilt, and the rebuilding is driven by load. Remove the load, and the body, sensibly enough, stops spending resources maintaining a strength it is no longer asked to provide. It lets the bone thin, because nothing is pushing on it. Muscle goes the same way and faster. In a single month in orbit, a body can lose 1/5 of its muscle mass and as much as 1/3 of its strength, especially in the legs and the back, the muscles whose whole job on Earth is holding a body up against the pull. The heart, which on the ground works constantly to push blood upward against gravity, finds that work suddenly easy and begins to slacken, growing less able to do the thing it no longer has to do. Fluids that gravity normally pulls in the legs drift up into the chest and the head, puffing the face, raising the pressure inside the skull, and pressing on the back of the eye until vision itself begins to change. The body in low gravity is not resting. It is actively remodeling itself, taking apart everything it built to fight a pull that is no longer there. Now, Mars is not orbit. It has about a third of Earth's gravity, not none, so the pull is real, and the body would have something to push against. The effects on Mars should be milder than the ones we see in true weightlessness, somewhere on the long slope between one full gravity and zero, and we do not know exactly where. But here is the turn that matters. Everything we have measured was measured on adult bodies that grew up at one full gravity and then visited low gravity for months. A human born on Mars does the opposite. That body does not lose a structure it built on Earth. It never builds the Earth structure in the first place. It grows its bones, its muscles, its heart, its whole frame in answer to a third of a gravity across its entire development from a single cell to a standing adult. It is not a body that adapted to Mars. It is a body that is calibrated to Mars, built to the planet's pull from nothing, with no Earth version underneath it. And here I have to stop and be honest about the largest unknown in any of this, because it sits right at the foundation and it does not have an answer yet. We do not know whether a human can develop in a third of a gravity at all. We have no data on a mammal growing up in partial gravity, none, because it has never been done. No mammal has ever been conceived, carried to term, and raised to adulthood anywhere but in the full gravity of Earth. The little we have is thin and it is not reassuring. Mouse embryos taken to orbit can divide and reach an early stage, but at lower rates of survival than the ones kept on the ground. And earlier flights that carried pregnant animals through part of their gestation found problems in the offspring afterward, in the sense of balance, in the developing nervous system, in the parts of the body that are built around knowing which way is down. That last point is worth sitting with, because gravity is not only a load on the bones, it is information. It is the signal a developing body uses to know up from down, to wire the inner ear, to lay out the systems that keep balance and orientation. A body that grows in a third of that signal, or in a strange and unfamiliar version of it, might come out subtly miswired in ways we cannot predict from the outside. We simply do not know. It is entirely possible that human development needs something close to one full gravity, and that a body grown in a third of it does not come out whole. The honest position is that whether a healthy human can be born and raised on Mars is an open question, and the answer might be no. The mechanism behind the bone loss is worth understanding, because it tells you why a body grown on Mars would be a genuinely different machine, and not just a weaker one. Bone is living tissue, constantly dismantled and rebuilt, and the rebuilding is steered by load. Push on a bone, and the body reinforces it. Stop pushing, and the body reads the lack of strain as a message that the strength is not needed and quietly stops paying to maintain it. In orbit, with almost no load, the bones thin fast because the body is, quite reasonably, declining to build a strength nothing is asking for. On Mars, with a third of a gravity, a body would be asked for some strength and would build some, but only the amount that a third of a gravity calls for. It would not waste resources building Earth-grade bone for a Mars-grade pull. The body that results is not broken. It is correctly built for the wrong planet. But the part that worries me most is not the bone, which we at least understand. It is the part of development that uses gravity not as a load, but as information. The inner ear builds tiny stones of calcium that sit on fine hairs and tell the brain which way is down, and that system wires itself early in answer to a steady pull. Wire it in a third of that pull, or in some unfamiliar version of it, and the sense of balance, of orientation, of which way is up, might come out calibrated to a world that is not Earth, or might come out wrong in ways we cannot predict, because we have never grown a mammal that way and looked. That is the honest center of the unknown. We have flown pregnant animals through part of their gestation in orbit and found their offspring afterward with disturbances in exactly these systems, in balance, and in the developing nervous system. We have grown early embryos in space, and watch them divide, but only to an early stage and at lower survival. No mammal has ever gone the whole way, conception to a standing adult, anywhere but in Earth's full pull, and no creature at all has done it in the in-between pull of Mars. So when I say a Mars body would be calibrated to Mars, I am already assuming the calibration works, that a whole healthy body can be grown in a third of a gravity. That assumption is exactly the thing we cannot yet check, and it is entirely possible. The honest answer is that it cannot be done at all. The honest size of the unknown here is hard to overstate, so let me draw the line exactly where the evidence stops. Everything measured about bodies in low gravity comes from one of two places, the near zero of orbit or the full pull of Earth, and Mars is neither. It sits at a third of a gravity, somewhere on a long slope between weightlessness and the pull we evolved in, and we have no data anywhere on that slope. We do not know whether a third of a gravity is enough to grow a body more or less normally, with milder versions of the orbital problems, or whether there is some threshold below one full pull, where development simply does not come out right. The honest answer is that the middle of the curve is dark, and Mars is sitting in the middle of it. That gap matters most at the very beginning of a life, because gravity is woven into development in ways we are only starting to map. A growing body uses the steady pull as a reference, a cue for how to build the systems that sense direction and keep balance, a load that shapes how bone and muscle and the heart lay themselves down. A fetus develops in that field. A child grows in it. We do not know which parts of that long process truly need a full gravity and which can proceed in a third of one, because the experiment has never been run on any mammal, not once anywhere. The few times animals have carried young through part of a pregnancy in orbit, the offspring showed disturbances in exactly the systems gravity is supposed to help wire. That is a warning, not a verdict, but it is not nothing. So when I grant, for the sake of the argument, that humans can be born and raised on Mars, I want to be clear how large a thing I am granting. I am assuming away the single biggest question in the whole subject. It is entirely possible that the answer is no, that a human body cannot be grown whole in a third of a gravity, that the attempt produces bodies that do not develop right, and that the last human born on Earth never comes because the off-world birth never works. If that is the truth, then everything after this is moot, and we remain a single species at the bottom of one well for as long as we last. I am setting that possibility aside to follow the other branch, the one where it works, but setting it aside is not the same as ruling it out, and I will not pretend it is. Set the difference between a visit and a lifetime side by side, because it is the hinge the whole physiology turns on. Everything we have measured comes from visits, adult bodies that built themselves at one full gravity and then spent months in a lighter pull, losing a fraction of what Earth had given them, and then mostly regaining it once home. Even those temporary losses run deep and recover slowly. But a body grown on Mars is not a visit. It is a permanent residence in the lighter pull from the first cell onward, with no Earth baseline ever laid down to lose or to return to. Whatever a third of a gravity does to a developing body, it does across the whole of development, and it does it as the only condition that body has ever known. That changes the question entirely. For a visiting astronaut, the worry is how much they lose and whether they get it back. For a Mars-grown person, there is nothing to lose and nothing to get back, because the Earth body was never built. The bone is as thick as a third of a gravity calls for, and no thicker. The heart is as strong as a third of a gravity needs, and no stronger. The systems that sense up and down are tuned to a pull that is not ours. None of this is damage in the way an astronaut's bone loss is damage. It is correct construction for the wrong world, which is a stranger thing, and a more permanent one, because there is no original to restore. And we cannot say with any confidence how far it goes, because the slope from one full gravity down to a third of one has never been measured in a developing body of any kind. Maybe a third is enough to come out close to normal, the effects mild, the body workable. Maybe it is not, and something in the growing goes wrong below some threshold we have never found. The data simply stops above this question. What we can say is that a body grown there would be built for there, calibrated to a pull that is not Earth's, and that the further it diverged from an Earth body in the growing, the harder the return to Earth would become, until somewhere along that slope the return stops being possible at all. There is one more piece of the orbital evidence that unsettles me for what it implies about growing up, and it is the eye. In low gravity, the fluids of the body drift upward, raising the pressure inside the skull, and that pressure presses on the back of the eye and slowly reshapes it, changing vision in ways that do not fully reverse for some who come back. That is in adults fully formed, after months. A body that grew from the start in a third of a gravity would lay down its fluid balance, its pressures, the whole plumbing of its head, in answer to that lighter pull from the beginning, and we have no idea what that does to an eye that is still forming, or a brain that is still wiring, because it has never been watched. We are, every one of us, a one-gravity species. Every human eye and inner ear and circulatory system that has ever developed in this exact pull, changed the pull during the building, and we are off the edge of everything we know. So I am going to do something the science does not yet license, and say so plainly as I do it. For the rest of this, set that deepest uncertainty aside. Assume the hardest problem is somehow solved, that a human can be conceived and carried and grown to adulthood in a third of a gravity, and that the body which results is healthy on its own terms. Grant all of that, because even if we grant it, even in the most optimistic version where Mars birth works perfectly, something waits on the other side that does not go away. The body that results is built for Mars and only Mars. So what happens to that body, that healthy Mars-grown body, the very first time it stands in the full gravity of Earth? Earth's gravity would try to crush a body that grew up on Mars, and it would not have to try very hard. We can see the shape of the problem already in the bodies that come back from long stays in orbit. After half a year in near weightlessness, returning crews cannot stand on their own. They are carried out, laid flat because their legs cannot hold them and their hearts cannot keep blood in their heads against the sudden return of weight. They sway, they faint, their bones are thinned, their muscles are wasted. And these are adults who grew up at one full gravity, who built Earth bodies first and only lost them temporarily. Even for them, coming back is brutal, and recovery takes months. For some of them, it never fully completes. Of 17 who flew long missions in one set of measurements, 9 had not regained the bone in their lower leg even a full year after coming down, and the longer the flight, the worse the recovery ran. Now take that and push it all the way. A person born and raised on Mars never had an Earth body to lose. Their skeleton was laid down for a third of a gravity. Their heart was sized for a third of a gravity. Their muscles, their balance, the whole architecture of standing and moving, all of it calibrated to a pull that is 1/3 of ours. Bring that body to Earth and set it on the ground, and it does not feel a little heavier. It feels itself nearly tripled in weight in an instant. Every step is 3 times the load the legs were built to carry. The heart, sized for the gentler world, is suddenly asked to push blood up through a body that weighs 3 times what it was designed against. The bones, never having grown thick against a strong pull, carry a real risk of breaking under the body's own mass. This is not a discomfort to be pushed through. For a body built at a third of a gravity, arriving at 1 full gravity could be the same kind of event that a crushing acceleration is for us, a load the structure was never specified to bear. Standing might be impossible, walking might fracture a leg. The strain on a heart that never trained against Earth could be more than it can do. We are not talking about a hard adjustment, a few weeks of feeling rough. We are talking about a body meeting, for the first time, a force that its entire construction assumed would never come, and possibly failing under it. So the door between the worlds, which we imagine swinging freely, only really opens one way. People from Earth can go to Mars. The pull they arrive in is gentler than the one they left, and a body built for one full gravity can unload into a third of it without breaking. The way these things always go more easily downhill, but the return trip for someone built on Mars runs uphill into a force that grows with every kilogram of their own body. And the heavier world does not forgive a frame that was never made for it. The first world you can leave, the second you may never be able to enter if you were not built there. I want to be fair about the ways this might soften because they exist, and it would be dishonest to pretend they do not. Perhaps medicine finds a way to thicken those bones and strengthen that heart before the crossing. Perhaps a Mars-grown person spends years training in a spun-up chamber that fakes Earth's pull, building the body up gradually before ever facing the real thing. Perhaps drugs, or supports, or some technology we have not thought of, makes the impossible merely very hard. I cannot rule any of that out, and I would not want to. But every one of those is a fix laid over the problem, an exception fought for at great effort, and none of them changes the default. Left alone, on the plain physiology we actually have, a body that develops entirely in a third of a gravity does not get to stand on Earth. The crossing home is closed by the body itself. Look closer at what the heavier world does to a body that meets it unprepared, because the detail is where the danger lives. When a crew comes back from months in orbit, the first enemy is not even the bones, it is the blood. In low gravity, the heart stops working to push fluid upward because nothing is pulling that fluid down, and it slackens to match. Bring that heart back to a full pull, and it cannot keep blood in the head against the sudden weight, so a returning astronaut who tries to stand simply faints, the blood draining to the legs, the brain starved for a moment. They are kept lying down at first for exactly this reason. Now imagine a heart that never once trained against Earth, that grew its whole life sized for a third of the pull, asked to do that work from the first second of arrival. It is not a question of feeling dizzy, it is a question of whether the body can keep itself conscious at all. Then the weight itself. A Mars-grown body arriving on Earth does not feel somewhat heavier. It feels close to 3 times heavier, because Earth pulls nearly 3 times as hard as the world that shaped it. Every movement that was effortless becomes a strain against 3 times the load the muscles were built for. The skeleton, never thickened against a strong pull, carries a real risk of breaking under the body's own tripled weight, the way a structure built to one specification fails when loaded far past it. Lifting an arm is work. Standing is work. A fall that on Mars would be nothing becomes, on Earth, a fall under triple weight onto bones that were never made to take it. This is why the door only opens one way, and the asymmetry is not arbitrary, it is the plain direction of the physics. Going from Earth to Mars is unloading, dropping from a strong pull to a gentle one, and a body built strong can survive being asked for less. That direction is survivable, even if it slowly wastes the body afterward. Going from Mars to Earth is the reverse, loading a gentle world body with a force it was never specified to bear, and that direction the body may simply not survive. Downhill, into the shallower well, the body can fall. Uphill, into the deeper one, it can break. The same gravity that lets Earthlings descend to Mars is the gravity that forbids Mars, born from ever climbing back. It would be dishonest to present the closed door as something nothing could ever pry open. So let me lay out the ways it might be fought, and why each is a fight rather than a fix. The first is to build the body up before the crossing. A Mars-born person who wanted to reach Earth might spend years in a spun-up chamber, a centrifuge large enough to fake a stronger pull, slowly training bone and heart and muscle towards something Earth could tolerate. That is conceivable. It is also a long, deliberate, expensive program undertaken against the body's whole history, and it would have to work well enough that one full gravity did not break what the training had built. Possible, perhaps. Routine, no. The second is medicine. Drugs already exist that slow the loss of bone, and more may come that build it. A future settlement might dose its people to thicken the skeleton, strengthen the heart, brace the body against a pull it never knew. Maybe that closes part of the gap, but it is again an intervention laid over a body that was grown for somewhere else. A constant medical effort to make possible a thing the physiology resists, not a body that can simply step onto Earth and stand. And the third route, supports and exosuits and machines worn to carry the load, only proves the point, because a body that needs a machine to bear its own weight on a planet is not a body that can live on that planet. It is a visitor in a brace. The thread through all of them is the same. Every one of these is an exception fought for at cost, a way of forcing the body across a line it is not built to cross. None of them is the default, and the default is what shapes a species. Left alone, with no heroic program and no constant medication, a body grown in a third of a gravity does not get to stand on Earth, and most bodies in most lives are left alone. So the partition holds, not as an absolute law of nature that nothing could ever bend, but as the overwhelming ordinary truth of how those bodies and that planet meet. The door can perhaps be forced by a few at great effort, for everyone else it is simply shut. Hold on the simple physical fact of weight, because it is easy to say tripled and hard to feel. On Mars, a body and everything in it weighs about a third of what it does here. Lift that body to Earth, and every part of it suddenly weighs 3 times what it ever has. The arms are 3 times heavier to raise. The head is 3 times heavier on the neck. The chest wall itself, the muscle and bone that lift with every breath, is 3 times heavier to move. So breathing becomes labor, each inhalation a small fight against a weight the body never trained for. Blood that the heart could loft easily in the gentle pull now pulls downward, 3 times heavier, and the heart, sized for the lighter world, strains and may not manage to keep enough of it in the head to hold consciousness. This is why even a brief visit would be dangerous, not merely uncomfortable. We are not describing someone who feels sluggish and out of shape. We are describing a body whose every structure is suddenly loaded past its design, all at once, with no ramp up. The skeleton, grown thin against a light pull, bears triple weight on bones that may crack under it. The heart labours against a load it was never built to clear. The person cannot reliably stand, cannot reliably stay conscious, and risks a fracture from the simple act of being upright. A few minutes might be survivable with help. A life is out of the question. The planet does not need to do anything to harm them. Its ordinary, constant pull is the harm. And the asymmetry is the whole of it, and it is not arbitrary. A body built strong for Earth can go to Mars and be asked for less, and survive being asked for less, even as it slowly softens in the gentler pull. That is downhill, and bodies can go downhill. A body built light for Mars cannot come to Earth and be asked for triple, because triple is past what the structure can bear. That is uphill, and this particular uphill the body cannot climb. The same gravity that waves Earthlings down into Mars is the gravity that bars Mars born from ever climbing back, and there is no symmetry to appeal to, because strength can always do less than it was built for, and never more than it was built for. And that is the fact that turns this whole question from a curiosity into something with a hard edge. Because if the new humans cannot come down to Earth, then the threshold we started with is not a soft symbolic line. It is a real partition drawn through the species by gravity. On one side, the people who can stand on Earth, on the other, the people who cannot and never will. And the moment that partition closes, there is a specific, real person standing at the hinge of it. The last human born on Earth is also, for the lineage that comes after, the last one of them who could ever stand here at all. So let us stop circling it and name it directly, and look hard at the day that threshold is crossed. There will be a specific child who is the last human ever born on Earth, a real person, on a real day, and almost certainly no one alive at the time will know it. That is the strange thing about every last of its kind. It is only ever recognized looking backward. The last speaker of a dying language says their last sentence on an ordinary afternoon, and no one writes the date down, because no one yet knows it was the last. The last of a vanishing animal dies in some quiet place, and the species is only declared gone years later, when enough time has passed without another. A last is not an event you can see while you are standing in it. It is a thing you can only name from far enough ahead to be sure nothing more came after. The last birth on Earth will be exactly like that. There will not be a final, ceremonial child, marked and remembered. There will just be a long, slow tilting of the numbers as more and more of the species lives and is born off the planet, until 1 year, without anyone counting, more humans are born away from Earth than on it. And then, sometime later, in a world where being born on Earth has become the rare and old-fashioned thing, a child is born here who simply turns out, in the long retrospect of history, to have been the last. On the day itself, it is just a birth, indistinguishable from any other. The mother does not know. The child does not know. It becomes the last only later, when the count is finally taken, and it turns out that no one ever followed. And there is a second threshold riding quietly behind the first, and it is even less visible. After the last human is born on Earth, that person still lives a whole life. They grow old here, on the world that bore them, the final member of the only group there will ever be of people native to this planet. And on the day that last Earth-born human dies, something passes that has been true for the entire history of our kind. For the first time, there is no living person anywhere who was born on Earth. Everyone alive was born somewhere else. The planet that made every human who has ever existed now holds, among the living, not one of its own children. And later still, after enough generations have grown up in a third of a gravity, comes the day when no living human could even survive standing on Earth at all. When the homeworld has become physically off limits to every member of the species. This is the center of the whole thing, the place all the physics has been carrying us toward, and I want to state it as plainly as I can. The last human born on Earth is also the last human of the lineage that follows who could ever stand on it. The two thresholds are the same threshold. The day the door closes on being born here is the day the door closes on being able to come here for everyone who comes after. And the world on the other side of that door does not change at all. Earth does not die, it does not burn or freeze or empty of life. It goes on being the most alive place we know of, blue and turning and wrapped in weather, oceans moving, storms crossing, the whole living machine of it running exactly as before. It simply becomes, without any visible event, the one place its own descendants are no longer allowed to set foot. That is the vertigo of it for me. Not a catastrophe, not an explosion, just a planet, perfectly intact and fully alive, quietly passing out of reach of the very species it produced, on a day that looks like every other day. The world that is the origin of every human story becomes a place that humans, the new humans, the only humans left, can see and study and orbit and never touch. And the moment it turns, no alarm sounds, because nothing has happened that an instrument could catch. A child was born, a different child was not. The numbers tilted past a line no one was watching. I have to keep this honest, because the whole argument is conditional, and I will not pretend otherwise. We do not know that any of this happens. We do not know that humans can be born off Earth at all, and if that turns out to be impossible, then there is no last birth, no partition, no closed door, and this entire threshold never comes. Everything here rests on the assumption that we solve the hardest problem, the one from a few minutes ago, and become a species that truly reproduces away from this planet. If we do, the rest follows from gravity and bone with a kind of cold inevitability. If we do not, none of it does. That is the honest shape of it, and I would rather hand you the uncertainty than dress it up. The thing about a last of its kind is that it is invisible from inside, and that invisibility is the whole of its strangeness. No one ever stands in a moment and knows it is the final one. The person speaking the last living sentence of a language speaks it like any other sentence to someone on some ordinary day, and only decades later does anyone realize that after them the language held no native voice. The last individual of a fading species does not know it is the last, and neither do we until the years pile up with nothing following. A last is not a thing that happens, it is a thing that turns out to have happened, recognized only from a distance, named only in retrospect, when the absence of anything after it has finally become certain. The last human born on Earth inherits exactly that invisibility. There is no reason anyone at the time would know. Births away from Earth would have become first unusual, then common, then the ordinary way of things. And somewhere in that long tilt, a final child is born on the home planet without a single marker to set the day apart. It is one birth among the many happening across 2 or more worlds that year, indistinguishable from any other while it is occurring. Only the long backward look of history, counting and finding that no one ever came after on this particular world, could ever pin it down, and even then probably not to a person, only to a stretch of years in which the last Earth births quietly stopped. What gives it weight is not the day but what the day closes. Every human who has ever lived, every person in all of history, was born on this one planet. That is the single most universal fact about our kind, the one thing true of every last one of us without exception. The last human born on Earth is the person at whom that fact stops being true going forward, the final entry in a list that began with the first human and ran unbroken through every life that has ever been lived. After them, the list of Earth-born humans is closed. Not paused, closed. There will be more humans, perhaps for a very long time, but never again one of those, never again a person who can say the world that made the species also made them. There is a second threshold hidden behind the last birth, even quieter than the first, and it is the one that finishes the severance. After the last human is born on Earth, that person does not vanish. They live a whole life on the world that bore them, the final member of the only group there will ever be of people native to this planet, and around them the last of the other Earthborn grow old too, but age comes for all of them, and there is a final one, a last living person, for whom Earth was the place of their own first breath. On the day that person dies, something that was true for the entire history of our kind becomes false. For the first time ever, not one living human anywhere was born on Earth. Every person alive came from somewhere else. And later still, after enough generations of grown-up light, comes a third line crossed, the hardest of the three. A day arrives when no living human could even survive standing on Earth at all, when every member of the species has a body the home planet's pull would break. At that point, Earth is not merely a world none of the living were born on, it is a world none of the living could endure. The planet that made every human who has ever existed has become physically off limits to the entire species it produced, and it happened across 3 quiet thresholds, none of which anyone could see while standing in it. This is the spike of the whole thing for me, the place the floor drops away. Not because anything is destroyed, but because nothing is. Earth stays perfect, it stays blue and turning and full of life, the richest world we know of, and it simply slides out of reach of its own children on a series of ordinary days that no one marks. The world that is the source of every human story becomes a thing the new humans can see and study and orbit and never touch, and the moment it turns is invisible, because the turning is not an event. It is a tilt in the numbers, a body grown a little lighter, a door that was never slammed because it was never even closed in any one instant. It only, gradually, was shut. There is a single year, somewhere out ahead, when more humans are born off Earth than on it, and like the last birth itself, no one will notice it as it passes. For a long while, almost everyone is still born here. Then off-world births go from rare to occasional to common, and in some year the count quietly tips, and from then on the typical human enters existence somewhere other than the world that made the species. That crossover is not a ceremony, it is a line in a table that no one is keeping, crossed in the ordinary course of millions of separate lives, visible only to someone much later who goes looking for the year the balance turned. And trailing well behind it comes the true last one, the final child born on Earth, after the planet's births have dwindled to almost nothing. Born on a day exactly like any other, becoming the last only in the long retrospect when it turns out no one ever followed. What makes it land is not the day but the list it closes. Every human who has ever lived was born on this one world. That is the single fact true of all of us without exception, from the first of our kind to the most recent person drawing breath right now. The last human born on Earth is the final entry on that list, the person after whom it is sealed, and the sealing is silent, because a list closing is not an event anyone can stand inside and see. So the milestone that ought to be among the largest in the whole human story passes as the smallest possible thing, a single ordinary birth on an ordinary day. No announcement because no one can know, no mark because there is nothing to mark it by, just a child born on the world that bore us all, who happens, in a way only the future can confirm, to be the last the planet ever makes. And behind that child, the long unbroken line of everyone ever born here, closed at last, on a day that looked like nothing. And there is a strangeness even in the naming, because we may never agree which birth was the last. A planet does not stop having births on a single clean day. They dwindle, grow rare, scatter to a handful a year, then almost none, and somewhere in that long fading is a final one. But the records of such a time, spread across worlds and centuries, may never be sharp enough to point to a single child and say, that one, after that there were no more. The last human born on Earth might be a person no one can ever identify, a birth lost in the ordinary noise of a quieting planet, certain to have existed and impossible to name. The most pivotal birth in the history of the species, and we might not even be able to find it. That is how quietly the largest thresholds pass. Not with a marker, but with a slow thinning into silence that only the far future can look back on and call an ending. But assume we do cross it. Assume the last birth happens and the door closes and the new humans are out there for good, unable to come down. You would think that is the hard part, the saddest part, the people stranded out there who can never come home. And there is something to that. But it is not the turn I keep catching on, late at night when I follow this all the way down. The turn that unsettles me most is not about them at all. There is a harder version of this question waiting, and it is not the one you think. It is not about the people out there, the ones who can never come down. It is about this world, the one they came from, and about a word I have been using all night as if it were simple. I am going to come back to it. And when I do not think the word home is going to sound the same. Separate a population completely, put it under a different pull and a different sky, and it does not simply live apart. It drifts apart. Over enough time, a group of humans cut off on Mars, breathing manufactured air under a third of Earth's gravity, would stop being a far-flung branch of us and start becoming, slowly, a different kind of thing. This is not speculation about the distant future of some alien biology. It is the ordinary behavior of life whenever a piece of it is isolated, and we have watched it play out on Earth countless times, on every island that ever cut a population off from the mainland. It starts before any new trait appears, with the simple fact of who goes. The first permanent population on Mars will be small, and a small group carries only a fraction of the genetic variety of the species it came from. Whatever those founders happen to carry becomes the whole inheritance of everyone after them. Traits common back on Earth might be missing entirely out there, and rare ones might, by pure chance, become standard, simply because a few of the founders had them. This is the founder effect, and it means the Mars population starts out already a skewed sample. A narrow draw from the parent species, different from the moment it is sealed off, before selection or mutation have done anything at all. Then the pressures that shape a body go to work, and on Mars they all point away from Earth. The gravity is a third of ours, so over generations there is no advantage to the heavy, dense bones and the powerful heart that Earth demands, and a body can do well being taller, lighter of frame, built for a gentler pull. The radiation is higher, sleeting down day after day, and radiation damages the molecule that carries inheritance, raising the rate at which changes appear in each generation, feeding more raw variation into the population for the world to select on. And the whole environment is novel in ways Earth never was, an indoor world of managed air and managed light and managed everything, selecting quietly for whatever lets a body do well inside it. None of these pressures is the one our bodies were shaped by. Every one of them pushes the Mars line further from the Earth line, generation after generation. And over a long enough run, that divergence does not stay a matter of degree. Populations that are isolated and pushed by different pressures for long enough eventually become unable to interbreed at all, and at that point they are not one species with two branches, they are two species. Whether a Mars population would ever cross that final line, and how long it would take, is genuinely uncertain, and I will not pretend to a number. Full reproductive separation can take a very long time, but the visible divergence, the change in how the bodies look and work, can run far faster than that, and it could be plain within a handful of generations, long before the deeper genetic split is complete. The Mars humans might be recognizably different in height and build and physiology, while still, in principle, members of the same species. Different in body, well before different in kind. There is also a faster route, and it would be strange to ignore it, because a population that can already reshape its own biology might not wait for the slow work of selection. A people living on Mars, with every reason to want bodies that handle the radiation better and the low gravity better, might simply change themselves, deliberately, generation by generation, steering their own descendants toward the planet they actually live on. If that happens, the divergence is not slow at all. It is chosen and fast, and it could open a gap between the Earth lineage and the Mars lineage far quicker than nature alone would manage. We do not know whether that path gets taken, but it is on the table, and it runs in the same direction as everything else, away from one shared human form. I should be honest that we have no precedent for any of this. There has never been a human population under a sustained, genuinely different gravity, and we cannot say with confidence how fast or how far the divergence would run, or whether the split that comes first is biological at all, rather than simply cultural. Two peoples grown so far apart in how and where they live that they no longer think of each other as the same. The timescales are open, the mechanisms are not. Founder effect, drift, mutation, selection, and possibly our own hand on the controls, all of them present, all of them pointing the same way, toward a species that becomes more than one thing. The first thing that separates a Mars population from Earth is not any new trait at all. It is simply who happens to be in the founding group and how few of them there are. A species carries its variety spread across billions of individuals, but the first lasting settlement on another world is small, maybe thousands, maybe fewer, and those founders carry only a slice of the whole. Whatever genetic variety they happen to bring becomes the entire inheritance of everyone who descends from them. Whole common traits of Earth humanity might simply be absent out there, never having been packed into the small group that left, while some rare quirk that a few founders carried becomes, by sheer chance, ordinary in their descendants. This is the founder effect, and it means the Mars line begins already different, already a skewed and narrowed draw from the parent species before a single new mutation or a single generation of selection has done anything. On top of that, in a small and isolated population, pure chance keeps reshaping the mix. In a group of billions, A rare trait stays rare, and a common one stays common, because the law of large numbers holds everything steady. In a small group, the proportions wander on their own, traits drifting toward common or vanishing entirely from one generation to the next, for no reason but luck, the way a handful of coins gives lopsided runs that a million coins never would. This drift, working on the already narrowed founding stock, pushes the Mars population further from the Earth one generation by generation, quietly, without any pressure pointing it anywhere. The two groups would grow apart simply because they are separate, and one of them is small, even if Mars were somehow identical to Earth in every other way. And Mars is not identical to Earth in any way that matters. So on top of the founding skew and the random drift comes the steady push of a genuinely different world, and unlike drift, that push has a direction. Every advantage on Mars points away from the Earth body, and pointed pressure, sustained across enough generations, does not nudge a population. It moves it. Once the slow forces have had their run, the divergence does not stay a matter of degree, and there is also a fast way it could happen that we should not ignore. The slow way is the ordinary one. A population shaped for generations by 1/3 of a gravity has no use for the dense bone and the powerful hearts that Earth demands, and the bodies that do best in the lighter pull may run taller, lighter of frame, built differently in ways that compound over time. The higher radiation feeds more change into each generation. The sealed, managed indoor world selects for whatever thrives inside it. Push for long enough in one direction, and a population does not merely vary. It moves, as a whole, away from the form it started in. The fast way is that a people, able to read and rewrite their own biology, might not wait for any of that. A settlement with every reason to want bodies that handle the radiation and the low pull better could simply steer its own descendants, generation by generation, toward the world they actually live on, changing themselves on purpose, far quicker than drift and selection ever would. If that path is taken, the gap between the Earth line and the Mars line opens not over many thousands of years, but over a handful of deliberate generations. We do not know whether it would be taken, but it points the same way as everything else, away from one shared human form, and it could get there fast. And I should be honest that the first split might not be of the body at all. Long before any line is crossed in the biology, two peoples living on two worlds, under different pulls, in different conditions, with contact slowed by the very distances and gravity that separate them, could simply grow apart in every way that is not genetic, until they no longer think of one another as the same kind at all. The biological divergence is real, and the mechanisms are not in doubt. Founding skew and drift and mutation and selection, and possibly our own hand on the controls. What is genuinely uncertain is the timescale and whether body or culture splits first. There is no precedent. No human population has ever lived under a sustained, different gravity. We are reasoning from the rules, not from a case we have seen, and the rules say only that the direction is apart. It is worth trying to picture, plainly, what two kinds of human might actually come to mean, not as a horror and not as a wonder, but as a fact. The Mars line, grown over generations in 1/3 of a gravity, could run taller and lighter of build. The heavy bone and dense muscle of Earth, slowly unneeded and slowly gone, living always indoors under managed dimmer light on a world where the sun is weak and the days are spent inside shielding. They might shift in ways that fit that life, carrying more change in each generation from the steady radiation. They would accumulate difference faster than a sheltered Earth population would. None of these is a monstrous transformation. Each is a body fitting itself, over time, to the actual world it lives in, which is exactly what bodies do. Run that far enough and the two populations cross the line that defines a species, the point where they could no longer have children together, even if they tried. How long that takes is genuinely uncertain, and I will not pretend to a figure, because we have no case to reason from, No human population that has ever lived under a different gravity for long enough to find out. The visible divergence, the difference you could see in height and build and bearing, would arrive long before that final genetic line, perhaps within generations, especially if a settlement steered its own biology on purpose. The deep split, the true speciation, would come later if it came at all. But the direction is not in doubt, only the speed. What that would make us, the people of Earth, is ancestors, not to more of ourselves, but to something descended from us and no longer quite us, the way we are descended from earlier kinds that were not quite human. We are used to thinking of that kind of branching as something safely in the past, a thing that produced us and stopped. It does not stop. Set a population apart under a different pull, and the branching simply resumes, with us in the role of the older kind, the ancestral form, giving rise to something that carries us forward and leaves us behind at the same time. And what little contact the two kinds kept would only deepen the divide rather than bridge it. They could speak across the distance, trade signals and records and words, but they could not easily meet, because the meeting place is the problem. The Earth line cannot live on Mars without the same walls and air the Mars line needs, and the Mars line cannot stand on Earth at all. Even a shared station in between, at some made gravity, would be a compromise neither body was grown for. So the two halves of what was once one species would drift on in steady sight of each other and almost never in the same place, connected by signal and severed by gravity. Growing apart not in spite of staying in touch, but while staying in touch, which is perhaps the loneliest way for a kind to divide. But suppose it does. Suppose that out there, over centuries, we slowly become two, the heavy world line and the light world line, divided by a gravity neither can cross to meet the other. That raises a question that is not about either of them. It is about the thing they both came from. The single world that made every human of every kind. The planet that is ancestor to all of it and reachable by only one side of the divide. What happens to Earth when the species it produced is split into kinds and only one of them can ever stand on it again? Eventually there is a version of Earth with no human standing on it anywhere, and the planet does not notice. This is the part people find hardest to hold, because we are used to imagining an empty Earth as a dead Earth, a ruin, a scorched or frozen thing in the aftermath of some disaster. That is not what this is. The Earth that its descendants cannot return to is not a corpse. It is the most alive place we know of, continuing in full, simply without us on the ground. Picture the planet from low orbit, which for the new humans may be as close as any of them can ever safely get. It is still blue. The oceans still move, driven by the same sun and the same moon. Tides still rising and falling on shores no one walks. Weather still wraps the whole sphere. White spirals of storm turning over the seas, clouds piling and breaking, rain falling on forests that do not need anyone to see them grow. The great green and brown spread of the land is still there, still alive with everything that was ever alive on it, except the one animal that left. From orbit it would look exactly as it always did, the living marble it has been for billions of years, turning under its thin shell of air. Nothing about the view would tell you that it had become untouchable. The change is not in the planet, it is in the bodies of the ones looking down. Because the people in that orbit, the descendants, cannot go down. Their Mars-built frames cannot take the pull. The world directly below them, close enough to fill the sky. The origin of every human who has ever lived is a place they can study and map and photograph and never set foot on, held away from them not by distance which they could cross in hours, but by gravity which they cannot cross at all. It is the nearest forbidden place there could be, a few hundred kilometers straight down, fully alive, and as out of reach to their bodies as if it were on the far side of the galaxy. For a while there are still the last of the Earth born among the living, the old ones who were carried up out of the well, or who never left, the final people for whom the surface is home ground. But they age, as everyone does, and there is a last of them too, a final human for whom Earth was the place of their own first breath. And on the day that person dies, the planet passes a line it will not come back across. From then on, every human anywhere was born somewhere else. The world goes on turning, blue and weathered and loud with life, and there is no longer a single living person who can say they came from it. It becomes, fully and finally, the place we are descended from, rather than the place any of us is from. And the planet itself keeps no record of the change. The oceans do not still. The weather does not pause. The life that fills every other niche carries on exactly as it did when we were here, because almost none of it ever depended on us in the first place. If anything, it loosens, spreads, reclaims. Earth becomes a kind of preserve that no one designed and no one guards, a whole living world running on its own, with its single departed species watching from above, unable to come down and rejoin it. We tend to think Earth needs us, or at least that we are central to it. We are not. It made us, and it can carry on in full without us, and one possible future is exactly that. The planet alive and complete, and empty of the one thing that once called it home. I find I cannot quite settle how to feel about that, and I think the honesty is in not settling. It is not a tragedy in the ordinary sense, because nothing is destroyed. The world is fine. The life is fine. In some ways it is better off. What is lost is only the connection, the ability of the children of this planet to ever again touch the ground that made them. And that loss does not announce itself. There is no moment of severance you could point to, no last footstep caught on film. There is only a slow passing out of reach, until one day the most familiar place in the universe, the only world any of us ever came from, has become a thing our kind can see but never hold. What makes the empty Earth so hard to picture honestly is that nothing about it looks like an ending. From orbit, the planet after the last human is the same planet it was before. The same white storms turn over the same blue oceans, the same green spreads across the same continents and pulls back with the same seasons. Rivers still run to the sea, ice still forms at the poles and melts at the edges, the whole circulation of water and air and life still turning over exactly as it has for billions of years. If anything, the land grows greener and wilder at the margins, the places people once held filling back in with everything that was only ever waiting. There is no scar visible from above. The world does not look abandoned. It looks, if anything, more fully itself. The change is entirely on the other side of the glass, in the bodies of the ones who can only watch. The descendants in that orbit, or further out, are looking down at the source of their whole lineage, the world that made every human who ever lived, and they cannot go to it. Not because it is far, it is the nearest world there is, close enough to cross in hours. They cannot go to it because their bodies, grown light, would break or fail under its pull. So the most reachable place imaginable is also for them the most forbidden, and the contradiction holds steady day after day, a planet filling the sky that the body simply cannot survive. And there is a final, quiet passing inside this, even quieter than the last birth. For a while there are still some of the earth born among the living, the old ones who began their lives on the surface. But they age the way everyone does, and there is a last of them too. On the day that final earth-born person dies, a fact that held for the entire history of our kind ends without a sound. From that moment, not one living human anywhere was born on Earth. The planet turns on below, blue and weathered and crowded with life, holding among all the living not a single one of its own children, and nothing marks the day because nothing has happened that a planet could feel. There is a reflex to think Earth needs us, that a world without people is a world diminished, and the empty Earth is the plainest possible answer to that reflex. The planet does not need us, and never did. Almost nothing alive on it ever depended on the one species that built cities and left. Take that species away, and the oceans keep their tides, the forests keep their seasons, the great migrations keep their routes, The whole living engine keeps turning on the energy of the same sun it always ran on. The land we held fills back in. The works we leave behind weather and sink and green over. Within a stretch of time that is long to us and an eye blink to the planet, the surface is simply wilderness again, running itself, answering to no one. So the earth its descendants cannot return to is not a monument and not a grave. It is a preserve that no one set aside and no one tends, a whole living world left to its own devices, carrying on in full. And the strangeness is that this self-running paradise sits a few hundred kilometers beneath people who came from it and cannot land. They can map every forest and never walk one. They can watch the storms cross the seas and never feel the rain. The nearest world there is, the one that made them, is close enough to study in fine detail and forbidden to their bodies on every single one of those days, held away not by distance but by the one thing distance cannot fix, the pull of the ground itself. I cannot quite decide how that should feel, and I have come to think the honesty is in refusing to decide. It is not a catastrophe, because nothing is lost that the world itself misses. The planet is fine. The life is fine. Better than fine. What is lost belongs only to us, the descendants, and it is not a thing but a connection, the ability of the children of this world to ever again touch the ground that made them. That loss has no moment you could point to, no severance caught on film. There is only the slow drift out of reach, body by lighter body, until the most familiar place in the universe has quietly become a place our kind can see and study and never hold. Which leaves a smaller, sharper question waiting underneath, about a word I have been leaning on all along. Give it time and even the marks we leave soften back into the world. The structures we built, left without anyone to maintain them, would weather as everything does, metal rusting, concrete cracking and crumbling, the sea taking back the low coasts, plants working into every seam until the lines we drew across the land blur and green over. Within a span that is long to a human and nothing to a planet, the surface would carry little obvious sign that a building species had ever held it. Not erased exactly, but absorbed, folded back into the ordinary processes of a living world that was busy long before us and stays busy long after. And that living world would be, by any measure we have, the richest and most welcoming place the descendants could ever know of, and the one most completely closed to them. This is the cruelty without a villain at the heart of it. They would orbit or pass the most habitable world in reach, a planet where a body could in principle live open to the sky, breathing freely, standing in the rain, the one place in all of space built for a human without a wall, and it would be the precise place their bodies could not survive. Every other world is hostile and reachable. This one is hospitable and forbidden. They could look down at the only world that would not need to be sealed against and never go to it. So they would study it, I think, the way you study anything you cannot have. They would map its weather and watch its seasons and know its oceans in detail, the ancestral world hanging there in their instruments, fully alive, fully documented, fully out of reach, a planet turned from a home into a subject, from the ground beneath a species into a bright object it observes from a safe and permanent distance. And the question that leaves, the one I have been circling all night, is what we are even saying when we keep calling that world home, when the people it belongs to can see it always and reach it never. And life on the empty earth would very likely not merely persist but flourish, which is its own quiet rebuke to how central we imagine ourselves. The pressures a building species puts on a world, the clearing and the taking and the crowding, would lift all at once. The seas would refill with what we fished out of them. The forests would spread back across the ground we held. The other large animals, so many of them pressed to the edges while we were here, would move back into the range we left. Within a stretch of time short to the planet, Earth would be wilder and fuller than it had been in all the time we shared it. A world recovered, running at its own richness. The descendants looking down would see not a ruin of our leaving, but a planet visibly better for it, greener, busier, more alive, and entirely beyond their reach. The home they cannot return to would be thriving without them, which is perhaps the hardest version of all to watch. Which forces the question the whole second half of this has been moving toward, the one I said I would come back to. We keep using a single small word for Earth, almost without thinking, the way we use it for any place we belong to. We call it home. But if the world we came from becomes a place we cannot return to, a place that is real and visible and forbidden to our bodies, then I am no longer sure the word means what we think it means. What is home for a species once the place it came from is a place it can never go? Here is the harder turn, the one I promised, and it is about that single word. For a species split by gravity, home stops being a place you can return to and becomes only a place you came from. The word quietly changes tense. It stops pointing at a destination and starts pointing at an origin, and those are not the same thing, and we have never before had to tell them apart, because for all of human history, home has been both at once the place you are from and the place you can always, in principle, go back to. That double meaning is about to come apart, and Earth is where it splits. Think about what home actually is for the Mars-born, the new humans, the only humans there will eventually be, the place they live, the place that fits their bodies, the place they can stand and breathe and belong, is Mars. That is home in the sense of where you are and where you can be, but the place they come from, the source of their whole lineage, the world that made the species, is Earth, and Earth is precisely the place they can never go. So the two halves of the word point at two different planets. The home you live in is Mars, the home you came from is Earth, and one of them is closed to you forever. This is the resolution of the thing I left hanging. The unsettling part was never really the people stranded out there. They are fine. They have a world, a working world, a place that is theirs. The unsettling part is what happens to the idea of home itself. For us right now, home is a place in space. You can point to it, you can go to it, it is somewhere you return. For the species that comes after the last Earth birth, the original home is not somewhere you can return to, it is somewhere you can only look at, a planet hanging in their sky, fully visible, fully real, and permanently out of reach. Home becomes less like a place and more like a time, a direction you can face but never travel, the way you can face your own past and never walk back into it. And the strange thing is that they will be able to see it the whole while. This is not a home lost to distance, faded and forgotten, a far-off star no one can find. Earth would hang right there, a bright point or a blue disk depending on where they stood, close enough to study in detail, close enough to ache over if they were the aching kind. The most reachable, unreachable place imaginable, near enough to see every day, forbidden to the body every one of those days. A home world turned into a view. I think that is harder than losing it altogether, because what is lost is not the sight of home, but the ability to ever close the distance, while the sight remains constant just overhead. There is a grief in that with no event to attach itself to, and that is part of what makes it strange. Ordinary loss has a moment. Something ends, and you can point to when. This loss has no moment. There is no day the descendants are exiled from Earth, no expulsion, no door slammed. There is only the slow accumulation of bodies built for a lighter world, until one generation simply cannot go down and was never told it couldn't because there was nothing to tell. They were born already unable to return. For them, Earth was never a place you could go. It was only ever the place the old recordings came from, the world in the pictures, the origin written into their biology and closed to their feet from birth. Home for them is a fact about the past, not an option in the present. And I think that is the real content of the last human born on Earth. It is the moment the word home, for our whole kind, begins its change from a place to a direction in time. The last child born here is the last one for whom Earth is a destination as well as an origin. The last for whom going home means a place you can actually arrive. After that, for everyone, home slowly becomes the thing you descend from, rather than the thing you can reach, an ancestor world, seen and not touched. The planet does not move, the descendants do not forget it. It simply slides from being where they can go to being only where they are from. For all of human history, the word home has quietly carried two meanings at once, and we have never had to notice they were two, because they always pointed at the same place. There is home as origin, the place you came from, where your life and your line began, and there is home as destination, the place you can return to, the ground you can always, in principle, stand on again. For every human who has ever lived, those were the same planet. The world you came from was the world you could go back to. The split between origin and destination is the thing the last Earth birth finally opens, and once it opens, it does not close. For the people who come after, the two meanings pull apart and settle on two different worlds. Home is the place you live, the place that fits your body, the ground you can stand on, and the air you belong in, is Mars, or wherever the light world line actually dwells. That is a real home, a working one, theirs in every practical sense. But home as origin, the source of the species, the world that made the whole human line, is Earth, and Earth is the one place their bodies can never go. So a Mars-born person has a home they live in and a home they came from, and these are no longer the same place, and the one they came from is the one forever closed to them. We have never had to hold the word that way. They would have no choice. This is the answer to the question I left hanging at the halfway mark, the harder turn I promised. The unsettling thing was never the people out there being stranded. They have a world. They are not lost. The unsettling thing is what becomes of home itself, the concept. Once a species is split by gravity, home stops being a place you can go and becomes a place you can only have come from. It changes from a location into an origin, from somewhere on the map to somewhere in the past, and the change happens to all of us, to the whole idea. On the day the last child is born on the world we can still, for now, return to. The cruelest part, if it is cruel at all, is that they would be able to see it the whole time. This is not a homeland lost to distance, faded into a far-off point of light no one can pick out, the way a true exile loses the country behind them. Earth would hang in the sky of the descendants, a blue disk or a bright star depending on where they stood. Near enough to study in detail, near enough to recognize the shapes of its continents under the moving cloud. The most reachable, unreachable place there could be, visible every day, closed to the body every one of those days. A homeworld turned into a permanent view, present and forbidden at once, which I suspect is harder than simply losing the sight of it would be, because the longing has something to fix on and nowhere to go. And the loss has no event to grieve, which is its own kind of strangeness. Ordinary loss comes with a moment, a thing that ends, a day you can mark and return to. This loss has no day, no generation is cast out of Earth, no door is slammed. There is only the slow accumulation of bodies grown a little lighter, until one generation simply cannot make the descent and was never able to, was born already unable, with no expulsion to mourn because there was never a moment of being sent away. For them, Earth was never somewhere you could go. It was only ever the world in the old recordings, the origin written into their biology and shut to their feet from the first breath they took. You cannot be exiled from a place you were never able to enter. You can only be descended from it. So the word changes, quietly, and for the whole species, from a place into a direction. Home stops meaning somewhere you can return, and starts meaning only somewhere you came from. The way your own past is real and visible in memory and impossible to walk back into. The last child born on Earth is the last person for whom home was both at once, origin and destination, the place you are from and the place you can reach. After that, for everyone who follows, home is a fact about where the line began, not an option for where the body can go. It becomes something you face, like the past, and never travel to, like the past. A direction in time, wearing the name of a place. Think about how a Mars-born person would actually come to know Earth, because it tells you what the word would mean to them. They would never have stood on it. They would know it as the world in the old records, the blue planet in the archive, the place the first people came from, spoken of the way we speak of an ancestral country none of the living have seen. It would be utterly real to them, documented down to its coastlines and its storms, hanging visibly in their sky, and yet it would be a place that exists for them only as origin, never as anywhere they could go. The whole emotional weight of the word, the going back, the standing again on the ground you came from, would simply be missing, because for them it was never an option that closed. It was never open. You cannot be homesick in the ordinary way for a place you can see every day and were never able to enter. It is a stranger feeling than that, if it is a feeling at all, the awareness of an origin you can point to and never touch, and it has no event to attach itself to, no leaving, no exile, no last look back from the deck of a ship. There is only the steady fact, present from birth, that the world the species came from is a world this body cannot bear. The grief, if there is grief, is for something that was lost before they were born. By no one's choice, on no particular day, in the slow tilt of bodies grown too light for the planet that started them. So home, for them, finishes its long change from a place into a direction. Not a destination on any map, but an origin in the past, a thing you face the way you face the years behind you, real and visible and impossible to walk back into. The last human born on Earth was the last for whom home meant both at once, the place you are from and the place you can reach. After that, the two come apart for good, and home keeps only the first meaning, the place you are from, worn now by a world you can see forever in your sky and never once set foot upon. So if that is what happens to home, if the place we came from becomes a thing we can face but never enter, then it is worth asking what actually remains true of us across that whole change. Strip away the returning, the standing on the ground, the going back. Once the last birth on Earth is behind us and the door is shut and home has turned into a direction in time, what is left that is durably, permanently true about the human story and the world that started it? What the last human born on Earth really marks is the end of the first part of the human story, the part where we are something this planet makes. That is the durable thing, the part that does not depend on the timeline or the details. For the whole of our existence so far, every human who has ever lived was produced by this one world, grown in its gravity, born onto its surface, a thing Earth did. The last birth here is the moment that stops being true. After it, we are no longer something Earth makes. We become something Earth only made, once, and now merely remembers. Gather the pieces and the shape is clean. The gravity well, the deepest one we live beside, slowly pushes the weight of human life and then human birth off the planet, not by anyone's decision, but by the plain arithmetic of cost. The world that receives those births, most likely Mars, is gentle enough in its pull to be reachable but hostile in every other way, a place where a body must be grown inside manufactured conditions from the start. That body, calibrated to a third of a gravity, cannot return to the full gravity of Earth, so the threshold of the last birth is also the threshold of the closed door. The isolated population drifts and divides and becomes over time more than one kind, and the origin world, fully alive, passes out of reach of its own descendants, turning from a home you can return to into a home you can only have come from. Each step follows from the one before it, and the first domino is nothing more than the depth of a hole. I keep being struck that none of this requires a catastrophe. There is no war here, no collapse, no asteroid, no dying sun. Every other ending we tell ourselves about involves something going wrong. This one involves everything going right. We succeed, we become a species of more than one world, exactly as we have dreamed of doing. And the price of that success, built quietly into the physics, is that the planet which made us becomes a place we can no longer reach, and the species which leaves it becomes, in time, something other than the thing that left. The triumph and the severance are the same event. You do not get one without the other, because the gravity that makes Earth hard to leave is the same gravity that makes it impossible to return to in a body built somewhere lighter. And I have to hold the honesty all the way to the end, because the entire structure stands on one assumption that might simply be false. We do not know that humans can be born and raised off Earth at all. If it turns out that development needs something close to a full gravity, if the body cannot be grown whole in a third of it, then there is no last birth on Earth, no off-world lineage, no closed door, none of it. The whole thing dissolves, and we stay, for as long as we last, a single species at the bottom of one well. So I am not telling you this will happen. I am telling you that if we do the thing we are reaching for, if we truly become a people of two worlds, then this threshold is waiting inside that success, unmarked and irreversible, written into gravity and bone, before we ever arrive at it. Set the whole argument out in order, and what stands at the end of it is not a prediction of doom, but a description of a threshold, hidden inside the thing we are reaching for. The well is deep, so the cost of living at the bottom of it eventually outweighs the pull of staying, and life, and then birth, slide toward the shallower wells. The nearest of those with solid ground is a world that will grow a body to its own gentle pull, and in doing so, build a body the deep well will no longer admit. So the moment we truly begin to be born off Earth is the same moment the way back begins to close, and the last human born on Earth stands exactly at that hinge, the final person for whom this world was both origin and destination at once. What makes it land the way it does, for me, is that it is not the shape of any disaster. Every other ending we rehearse for ourselves runs through something breaking, a war, a rock from the sky, a climate gone wrong, the slow death of the sun. This one runs through everything working. We become what we have wanted to become, a people of more than one world, and the cost folded silently into that success is that the world which made us passes out of our reach, and the part of us that leaves becomes, across enough time, something other than what left. The achievement and the severance are one event. They arrive together because the same gravity underwrites both, the depth that makes Earth hard to leave being exactly the depth that makes it impossible to return to in a body built somewhere lighter. So I do not offer this as a warning, because there is nothing here to avert, and nothing here that is even going wrong. I offer it as a thing that is true at the bottom of the path we are already walking, true in the plain arithmetic of gravity and bone, waiting at the far end whether or not anyone ever names it, a last child on an ordinary day on the world that made every one of us, and after that, a long story carried on somewhere else, by something descended from us, looking back at a bright point it can see and never touch. What stays with me, gathering all of it together, is that this is the one ending that costs us nothing to be wrong about and everything to be right about, and it asks for neither fear nor comfort, only clear eyes. There is no villain in it and no disaster. The gravity well is not cruel, it is just deep. The body that cannot return is not failing, it is correctly built for the world it was grown in. The divergence is not a fall, it is what life does whenever a piece of it is set apart and left to run. Every step is ordinary, even reasonable, and the sum of the ordinary steps is that the species stops being a thing this planet makes and becomes a thing it merely made, and the world that made it becomes a place its children can only have come from. And I want to hold the whole argument's honesty right to the edge of the close, because it rests on one thing that may not be true. We do not know that a human can be born and raised away from Earth at all. If the body cannot be grown whole in a lesser pull, there is no last birth, no closed door, no divided species, no untouchable homeworld, and we stay one kind at the bottom of one well, for as long as we last. So none of this is a forecast. It is the shape of what waits at the end of the road, only if we succeed in walking it. The cost folded inside the achievement, written in gravity and bone before we ever reach it. That is the argument, complete, and it lands quieter than a catastrophe, and I think heavier for being quiet. Not the death of humanity, the end of humanity as a thing of this earth, a last child, born on an ordinary day, on the world that made every one of us, and then a long story going on somewhere else, in something descended from us, that looks back at a bright point in its sky it can see forever and never reach. Let me try to say, as plainly as I can, what I think that actually means. I keep returning to the fact that this needs no disaster, because that is what sets it apart from every other ending we tell. There is no asteroid here, no war, no plague, no sun swelling to swallow the planet. There is only success, the thing we say we want, becoming a people of more than one world. And inside that success, quiet and unavoidable, is the threshold we have been tracing all night. The well pushes life off the planet. The lighter world grows bodies that cannot return. The separated line drifts into something new. The origin world passes out of reach of its own children. Each step is reasonable, none of them is a fall. And together they carry the species across a line it can never recross, on a series of ordinary days no one will ever mark. And I will keep the honesty to the last, because the whole structure rests on one assumption that may simply fail. We do not yet know that a human can be born and grown whole away from Earth. If a body cannot be built in a lesser pull, there is no last birth, no closed door, no divided kind, no untouchable home, and we remain for as long as we last, one species at the bottom of one well. So this is not a prophecy, it is the shape of what waits at the far end of the road, but only if we manage to walk it, the price folded silently into the achievement, set there by gravity and bone long before we arrive. That is the argument whole. Not the death of our kind, but the end of our kind as a thing of this earth. A last child, born on an ordinary day, on the world that made every one of us, and then the long carrying on of something descended from us, somewhere else, that looks back across a little distance at a bright blue point it can see forever and never reach. I have laid out the gravity and the bone and the time as plainly as I can. Let me end by saying what I think it all comes to. What it comes to in the end is a change in what the word we means. For all of time so far, we has meant the people of one planet, a single kind grown in a single pull, born on a single world. The last human born on Earth is the last moment that holds. After it, we slowly become something spread across more than one world, divided by a gravity none can cross, and then, given time, more than one kind, the heavy world line and the light world line, ancestor and descendant, looking at each other across a gap of pull and distance. The story does not end. It splits and goes on in something that came from us and is no longer only us, on a world that is not this one, looking back at this one. That is the whole of the argument, and it lands somewhere quieter than a disaster and I think heavier. Not the end of humanity. The end of humanity as an earth thing, a last child, born on an ordinary day, on the world that made us, after whom we go on out there, changed, looking back at a planet we can see and never touch. Let me sit with what that actually means, and try to say it as plainly as I can. I keep coming back to that one number, 11 kilometers every second, the speed it takes to leave the ground here. For almost all of our history it was simply impossible, and then for a little while it was the hardest thing we knew how to do, and we did it anyway, and we told ourselves it was the beginning of something, and it was. But I do not think it was the beginning we pictured. The same well that was so hard to climb out of is the same well that will keep our descendants from ever climbing back in. A body built in a third of this gravity does not get to come home, because home, it turns out, is 11 kilometers a second of weight it was never made to carry. So there will be a last child born here, on the world that made every human who has ever lived. And the day it happens will look like any other day. No one will mark it. No one will be able to. And afterward, this planet will go on exactly as before, blue and turning and full of weather, the most alive place we know of, slowly becoming the one place the children of our children are not allowed to stand. I do not find that a tragedy, exactly. I find it clarifying. We were always going to be from somewhere. This is the somewhere, and one day it will only be the place we are from. If you would like more of these, a subscribe is the simplest way to keep them coming.